Welcome to Make Things That Matter, the podcast where we explore impactful products and the cultures that create them. I'm your host, Andrew Scottsko, and if I'm doing my job well, each episode of this show will help you to do meaningful work, make things that make things better, and have a great experience doing it. My guest in this episode is Sarah Avenir. I would describe Sarah as a full-hearted leader who models the strength of vulnerability in her experiments with creating sustainable businesses that are good for people and sharing about her journey. She's the CEO of And Yet, a people-first growth and creative web consultancy founded in 2008, and she's also the author of Gather the People, a book I really appreciated in which she introduced the world to a deep, not wide marketing theory that's actually built on genuine connection, vulnerability, and authenticity. I really enjoyed this conversation exploring people-first growth and bridging the gap between authenticity, spirituality, and leadership. I hope it inspires you as much as it inspires me and helps you step into the next level of your leadership with a full, open heart. So without any further ado, please enjoy Sarah Avenir. Sarah, welcome to the show. It's so great to have you here.
Thank you. I'm so excited. I see you have a soccer ball in the background. Is that your soccer ball or is that a child?
That one's just been sitting over there for a while. Actually, it's not, I don't even know whose it is. But the thing that I have been playing with a lot that has been a lot of fun during the COVID quarantine and everything is I've gotten into playing Frisbee. I don't know about you,
but
really? like everybody loves Frisbee. I got a Frisbee and I walk around
Frisbee, like that kind of Frisbee, or Frisbee, like when you're a kid and you play Frisbee. Yeah.
Like Frisbee, like Frisbee, like the whole thing. People it just turns everybody into a little kid again. And it's super fun. And
my gosh, I hadn't thought about that.
It's the ultimate socially distanced sport. You're like, hey, go 30 yards away and I'll throw you this thing.
Oh man, that's awesome.
It's been one of my favorite ways to have like socially distant hangouts with people during the pandemic is like, hey, I know we're doing the distance thing. So you go 20 yards away and I'll be over here and we'll talk while we throw this thing.
We'll just yell at each other and try to catch this Frisbee. That's awesome. I love it.
It actually works pretty well. Yeah, me too. It's been really fun. And it's funny that you jumped onto that because the thing I actually wanted to ask you, and I hope I'm getting this right, but I remember from when I was reading Gather the People, your first book, you had something in there. There's something you said in there that really resonated with me. And you tied it to, you said your middle name is Joy and that a lifelong lesson for you has and is to prioritize joy, to make it non-negotiable, to make it a part of your everyday lived reality. And I'm curious, sort of two things. What had you realize that? And how is that going for you? Like, how are you actually embodying that and practicing that in your life?
People perceive me as someone who takes risks and is always reinventing things. But I've realized over the years that it's not because I'm just really excited about risks. It's because I'm actually pretty afraid of a lot of things. And a lot of what motivates me is actually like, oh, I don't want this to happen. I don't want that to happen. Or even I don't want to avoid this thing that's hard. So I'm going to do it. And I don't know if you're familiar with the Enneagram or if you've done any of that kind of like personality framework stuff. But I'm pretty sure I'm a type 6, which is like the worst type. It's like the terrified one.
Isn't that what everybody says about their type though? They're all like, oh, I got the bad one.
I got the bad one. Yeah. I think they're all bad. It's just like, this is the ways in which you are terrible. No, I know people who teach Enneagram and they would say that is not true. But there's some aspects of it that's like forces you to explore your shadow. And then that is the vice of the 6 is fear. And, I think when I was younger and, excited about making new things and kind of taking my place in the world, I was always kind of pushed by the thing that I didn't want anymore. And the thing that was the problems that I was really pressing up against, that's what moved me forward. And then as I've gotten older and I'm not as motivated by like, you can achieve anything, here are these goals, you reach certain goals and you're like, wow, that didn't feel like I thought it would feel. And you kind of realize that you have to learn to love your life right now if you ever have a chance of loving it at any point in the future. And so I've been really trying to shift the way that I work from being pushed by things I don't want to being pulled toward what I really want. And that's not ever a goal, really. It's more like a state of being and a state of acceptance. And, I think we all kind of get to that point in our lives where we're just like, yeah, I don't think this like achievement stuff is working out so well for me.
Mm-hmm.
So joy is definitely that centering thing for me of like, oh yeah, that, and Sarah means princess, and I don't go too far into the princess, but if I'm like, I have sovereignty here over my own joy.
Okay, I have sovereignty of at least this much.
Yeah. So yeah, that's the story there. But
I love that.
You?
I love that.
Your type?
I have done all those tests as well in like the Enneagram specifically. I found it to be really useful, but also really frustrating. And the reason I say that is because depending when I've taken the test, I've gotten pretty different answers. And so it seems to kind of cluster around a few. So like, I don't know if I'm primarily a type 3, which is in Enneagram parlance, the achiever, or the type 7, which is I believe it's called the enthusiast. But where I sort of, after beating my head against the wall on that a bunch of times, I was like, maybe it doesn't matter. Like there's truth for me in both of these things. Cause like where I ended up with it, I read the stuff. It's useful. It's interesting. It definitely helped me confront and revealed some of the stuff I've got to work on. And it was kind of just like, okay, well, I have these 2 lists of things to watch out for. So great. Yeah. I'm just going to be aware of both of them and just off I go. But I really resonate with what you're saying though, about that, like that shift from being, the way I would say it is from being driven and pushed by something to being called and pulled by something.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And I remember for when that was for me, but I'm curious if there's like a moment. I find there's often a moment for people where this really clicks.
I don't know if there was a distinct, I was in my bed crying sort of moment, but there was a time when I had built this pretty successful little web development design shop. And we were a small team of 3 people serving like 21 clients at a time. We had a system and it worked really well, but it was just so efficiently optimized that it was just like, I can't do this anymore this way. And so I totally pivoted our company and thought about, what is it that is calling me, that's pulling me forward. And I created this whole visionary way of working with people called A Small Nation. And it was really imaginative and ambitious. We basically would take people from the seed of an idea to building their own. I always think of the internet as like, the fun thing about the internet is you get to create your own universe, really. And now I look back on Nation and I think, I'm not so compelled by the language because of, kind of taking over and colonialism and all of that stuff. But at the time, what that meant to me was not a nation that like takes over territory. It was building something totally new that didn't exist before. And so we would kind of build that place with people, and we would do that in public. And that was a learning experience for me. But I think it was the first time that I had just decided I have to prioritize this just as much as I prioritize what feels safe. And I've been reading this book called Nature and the Human Soul, I believe, by Bill Plotkin. And he talks about how we have this need for safety. And on the other side of that is a need for authenticity. So it's the need for like all the things to go smoothly, right? So that we can live and survive and keep doing what we're doing. And then there's also, though, this deep soul level need that all human beings have at some capacity to be themselves fully in whatever they're doing. And I think sometimes we compartmentalize those things. Some people say that doesn't belong in work because there's all kinds of other problems with that. You know, the kind of like, if you do what you love, you're working every moment of your existence kind of thing. And I can see that. But for me, everything, the theme of my life has been pursuing both of those things at the same time, bringing alignment into both of those things, because I don't have anybody kind of funding any of the things that I'm doing. I have to make that work. And you know, nobody ever hands you the life that is just the perfect one for you. You have to do that work for yourself. So, I think that's the hard and interesting and exciting thing about our lives and our work, is that we get to perpetually be on that path.
I'm reminded just in the moment of a quote from James Clear, where he said something like, entrepreneurship is a personal development journey disguised as a business venture.
Yeah.
You know, it's this idea that it's a journey of becoming, and no matter where you are on that journey, there's always some next step, some new thing to evolve into. And it's really, you know, you touched on a couple of really interesting points there that I actually want to kind of go in on a little bit more. It might be an interesting pivot point into talking about people first growth, which is a big focus for you these days. When you say people first growth, I feel like it's one of those terms that people are going to intuitively get, but just to clarify, what do you mean by that phrase?
Well, if you will suffer me using my tagline on you, it's for people who care about people over profit, but who need profit to care for people. Bottom line, that is the hardest thing in the world to do. And I come at it from a place of really caring a lot about how things that we do affect human beings, which includes ourselves and our teammates and everyone that our work touches. But I've also been scrappy, and I've had to be scrappy. I'm not someone that, you know, ever belonged in the world of like getting funding for a big idea. I don't really know that universe. And so I've always just said, well, what can I do with what I have, which is me, money, and the making of money so that I can pay people and continue to live has always been a priority.
The two things that I specifically wanted to have you unpack a little bit, you mentioned there's something really powerful about focusing on the small to get to the big, right? Yeah. And not just focusing on this big grand vision that we all talk about and are so used to, you know, so conditioned toward, but not focusing just on that, but focusing on the people that is for. And then also this idea that you have in the book draft so far, which we'll link to in the show notes, but this idea of fractal growth, right? The idea that the things grow by cloning what already works at a smaller scale and living the vision now all along the way, not just punting that joy for the future, you know, oh, one day when I get XYZ, I'll be happy. And I just would love to hear you unpack that a little bit more and describe what that looks like in practice. How do you do that?
Yeah, well, the idea of fractals as a model for growth, I learned from Adrienne Marie Brown's Emergent Strategy, which is fantastic. I'm always looking for books written by people who are thinking differently. And usually those books are not written for business. Although my book, I kind of have to, because that's my context. But Adrienne Marie Brown's context has been in social change and movements. And I love, and I think it's just, if you've experienced wins for yourself, as good as they feel, it's like you get there and it doesn't necessarily feel like what you thought it would. And it's because the small part of your world isn't actually resembling that big vision, right? It's like maybe you experience a moment of a win, but you're not living that win, you know, in all the parts of your life. It's just a moment. And so trying to figure out like what is actually really important about, if there's something that I want or something that I'm thinking would be amazing, like, why do I want that thing? What is that going to feel like tangibly for me? And once I figure that out, how can I give that to myself, to our team now, or at least live it in some small way? And in that way, be moving toward the future, but also not having to save that for later. And I just think part of it's a personality thing too, because like that big vision, I'm not motivated by those things anymore. Like if somebody's like, you're going to have a business that's making X amount of profit, and you're going to be able to have profit sharing that you've got 10% growth for your business partners, and you're able to do profit sharing for your team and all this. And I'm just like, it just feels so far away, so arbitrary, like I just made those things up. But if I'm thinking about a small thing, even if it's something that I don't have now or can't give myself now, if I can focus on that, 3 months from now, 6 months from now, it kind of inches me toward that thing. And it also allows you to be a lot more iterative and all of that stuff.
So what does that actually look like for you? You said those big visions, right? Okay, Sarah, you're going to have, X amount of money in profit every year, and you do this sort of employee profit sharing, or those sorts of things aren't doing it for you anymore. So what are you finding is actually getting you going these days? Like what is speaking to you now? Where are we meeting you in your journey right now?
Well, right now, I mean, on a business level, we're still kind of low on the Maslow's hierarchy of needs kind of thing. And yet I'm holding us high on the, like, we also need to be true to who we are while we're getting these basic needs met. I think software design, anybody who runs a digital agency of any kind has probably been trying to figure out, what is the trend, and has experienced commoditization of a lot of their services in just new ways that people can get started for close to nothing, And so really trying to figure out where do we fit. And not only that, but compared to 12 years ago when And Yet started, people they have software teams. Like everybody has their development team, right? And so,
as Andreessen said, software's been eating the world, probably will keep doing so.
Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of a requirement, and the things that you hire for, and collaborate with a different team with are different than they used to be 12 years ago. And all of this stuff is just constantly changing. And we've experienced that. And it used to be enough for us to just depend on our relationships and word of mouth and all of that. And we just realized and to be completely vague about what we do. We've always just been like, we're people first. We care about each other. We're good at software. We are good at design. Like, what can we do for you? And now we're realizing we have to share more about our vision for the world and about our strategic approach, and come at it from the things that only we can do, and the things that make us truly unique and why you can't hire that anywhere else. And so in order to do that, it's kind of those really early, it's like we kind of got to build a brand new world to exist in, a new set of people. We used to really just speak to developers, and we had people on our team who loved talking about dev tools and just loved blogging about JavaScript and React and all of that stuff, and loved writing books about it. And we don't have that anymore. And so, we have our developers, and the personalities of the people on our team are different, right? They don't care about being like a thought leader or, They do great work and they love to do that. And so trying to find that kind of mix of, what are the things that only we can do. And so when I took on the CEO role last July, it was really because after years of pushing for it, we'd finally decided we're going to focus on a strategic approach to growth, which is what I've been working on for the past 15 years in my career.
So there's kind of is an interesting arc here of your evolution and kind of the things you're doing. You sort of incubated them in your own life, but now you're sort of taking those into a larger scale with your new role and with the team. Yeah. So you're sort of taking what you were doing individually, and now you're saying, okay, well, how do we make that a we thing? How do we do this? How do how do we do people first growth? So I'm curious, Sarah, have you by any chance come across the work of a woman named Nilofer Merchant?
Yes, we have actually been talking about her lately, and I really am looking forward to reading her book. I know that you have also interviewed her, and her books. I haven't read them yet, but I'm excited to.
Yeah, because like listening to you, I'm like, oh man, Sarah, you need to read The Power of Loneliness by Nilofer Merchant, because I think you're walking the path she's talking about, where she talks about centering around that spot that only we stand. And that's the place from which we make our contributions. And so I would love for you to talk to me a little bit about how you're making this transition, and because you did this yourself for quite a few years, and then now you're really doing it in a different way for an organization, for a team.
Man, well, so much. I think a big part of it for me, that the coronavirus thing has actually helped me in some ways to get clear. I think for a lot of us, it kind of shook up the snow globe, and we're like, okay, what am I really here for? And I think at And Yet, I've always, in my previous roles, because I've served several, mostly on the marketing side, I've always had this kind of imposter syndrome feeling because of my background. I didn't finish college. I tried like a million different ways. I think I went to like 5 different schools, but I was always working full time. And then I had kids, and it just wasn't working out for me to do that. And so coming from that background and having like developed all my skills on my own, has been just hard for me to accept that I know what I'm doing. And I know everybody talks about imposter syndrome, and we all have that in certain degrees. But for me, joining the And Yet team, it's like I had met this team of people. I had thought before, I'm not a job person. I don't want to join a team, partially because like I like the challenge of having my income tied to what I can do. You know what I mean? I like being able to say like, oh, I want to take this trip. Let me like figure out how to fund that. You know what I mean? Rather than just having like a flat salary. But part of that was just fear too, of like, oh my gosh, these people are so smart. They're so skilled. They're so validated in all of these different ways of like where they went to school or just things that they've been asked to do by bigger companies or whatever that are highly validating. And so I come into this role and I'm just like second guessing myself and feeling like I need to learn a lot of new skills about specifically around like business development and how you build relationships with larger companies and all of this stuff.
Yeah. Tell me the story about the epiphany in Nashville.
Yeah. Well, I went to this seminar that was supposed to teach advanced positioning and lead generation, which was, it's great. I was like, yeah, that's what we need. We need advanced positioning and lead generation. I'm going to learn how big businesses or even just businesses that have, 13
like,
people.
Hell yeah, someone's going to show me the way.
Yeah. And I'm listening and I just start to get mad, like not mad at the presenter because, he's super great, or mad at the people there or anything. It was just mad because I was like, oh my gosh, this is I know this stuff. Like, I've taught this stuff. I've helped people do this stuff. Why did I not realize that advanced positioning and lead generation just means taglines and getting on podcasts? Because that's all they talked about, right? And and I was just really, really frustrated. And in that moment, I just decided, like, okay, no, I'm going to stop trying to learn how to exist in the corporate world. And I'm just going to accept that I may not have the pedigree, but I know this stuff. I've built this stuff from nothing. I've helped other people build this stuff from nothing.
I can do this. I can figure this out. I can
do this. Yeah. And we need to settle into the vision that I believe that we need to take. And so that's really been the journey ever since that happened.
That was like a year and a half ago, if I remember correctly. Yeah. And I'm like, wow, okay, hold on. So that is a huge moment in your life and your career as a leader, like roughly 18 months ago from the time we're recording this in November 2020. Walk me through how things have evolved for you since then, because if that's where you were 18 months ago, you've come so far in 18 months, which is amazing and good for you, and keep up whatever you're doing. But like, walk me through that. Like, that's where you were then. This is where you are now with this really clear focus on people first growth. You have this really clear positioning around helping your clients develop relationships through creative technology. Yep. You know, you've come a long way. So how did you walk that path? Because a lot of people listening to this resonate real strongly with that starting point of like, what the hell? Wait a minute. I know this stuff.
I know
what?
Stuff. Yeah, exactly. And I think there was that. And then there was also the question before I took on this role of like putting on, it was weird because I actually put the hat on before this role was even a possibility in my head.
And you were doing the job before you had the job. Yeah.
Well, the reason why was because when I had this realization that I know this stuff, I was like, well, what would I do if this were my company? And I think like when you're in a role working for someone else, no matter what your position is or how much power you have or how much they want you to own it and give it your all, asking yourself the question, what would I do if I owned this, is the only way to actually get to the truth of how you're going to be most effective in your role. After I wore that hat, I was just like, oh my gosh, like we need to do things so differently. At the time, we had several different pieces of the company. We had a video chat product called Talkie, which we've since spun off into its own company, and they're doing really well. We had a security company, which we then sold to NPM, and which they just got acquired by GitHub. So that we were actually able to focus on a thing. The thing about having a bunch of different things that your company is responsible for is like, maybe the security team is doing awesome. And then they're like carrying along the rest of the team and kind of funding the things like them to continue.
They're carrying the rest of the company on their back. So that's hard though, because you have that sort of split focus where you're like, wow, we have this multiple personality thing going on within the company. Like, what are we doing here? What do we stand for? Where are we going?
Right. Like, unless you're really, really careful, you're just going to be competing with your own set of resources all the time. And it's like winning here means you're kind of losing over here. And it was just really, really hard for any part of the company to make headway, even when they were doing really well. And so making that decision to really focus and kind of separate these things out was really important. And of course, we still do a lot of things as a digital agency. I mean, we have strategy, we have design, we have code. So it's not like we're totally, doing literally one piece of the puzzle, but it is a lot simpler to be able to develop a message around that is true, that we can really develop, and that we can talk about and bring people along with us.
So a lot of people listening to this, by now they're going, okay, Sarah, I'm in. Like, this people first growth thing, it sounds awesome. Let's do it. So how do I do it? Like, if I was that person and I, want to get started, if the person listening to this wants to get started in this tomorrow, right, what do they do?
Yeah. Well, I think it depends, if you are leading a team or if you're doing this on your own. But either way, you really do have to get clear about what it is that you know, what it is that you want, what are the resources that you have. And not just like we were talking about, not just on a big picture level, but on a very like daily kind of level. Like, what do I want my life to look like? What do I want this team to look like? And
what do I want Tuesday to look like in 18 months? Yeah,
exactly. And also get really, really clear on what you need. What do I need to pay the bills? I mean, really, when do I need it by? What are the actual constraints in which I am designing all of this? And getting clear on those things and making that really clear to all of the people around you that are going to be with you in this, and your teammates, your family. Maybe you've got some collaborators that you are accountable to, making that really, really clear. And then taking it a little bit at a time. So the one thing I have taken from the corporate world is the division of quarters as a really useful tool, and thinking of those as sort of seasons that you are doing a particular thing in. And so what I try to do is each quarter, each season, I have several different things lined up. I have so this is the story that we're telling during this quarter. It's based on who we are. It's based on what we're wanting. And it's also aligned with what we need. We have some sort of offer, some sort of invitation that is going to help to meet our financial need, or whatever it is that we need in that quarter, aligned with this narrative.
So could you give me an example? Like, what is that right now? What is that as of November 2020? What's Q4 2020's version of that?
Yeah. So we were entering into a season of kind of everybody was scared, right? And not quite sure if they were going to invest more in tech or less, or kind of just keep everything in house, not less. Obviously people are like, oh, technology, this pandemic is at least one part of the economy is not suffering. But that's not really true, because there's still a lot of uncertainty. And with that comes, people just kind of freeze up in their decision-making process, or they keep things in-house, keep things safe, that sort of thing. And so we were coming up on a season where we normally would have quite a bit of work, but that was kind of frozen and pulled back. And so we had a gap that we needed to meet of $70,000 starting in September. I think it was September. It might've been October that actually full 70K was staring at us in the face. To some people that might seem like a lot. To some people that might seem like nothing. To us, it's significant. So we were asking ourselves in August, looking at that, going, okay, well, what can we do to meet that need that's pulling us forward into this vision that we have of being an educational resource for people first growth, of helping companies to actually take this approach, deepening their relationships with their customers and growing in a way that it feels true to who they are. And so
that's what this goes back to that, like that tension you talked about between aligning what you want and what you need. So you want to be this resource, this kind of company, and this sort of, to exist this way in the world. Yeah. And what you need is, it's August. You've got 6 weeks until you have a 70K revenue gap to pay your bills.
Yes. Yeah. And those
So now
things
what?
happen on a personal level. They happen on a business
Sure.
level. It's the
Yeah.
same thing.
It's a great case study. So let's go into it. So obviously you made it past that. So what happened?
Yeah. So we put our heads together and started thinking, what is a way that we can help people, whether they hire us or not, that also has a component of something that we can offer and invite people into to hire us for. And the idea ended up being that this end of the year is going to be the season of the weirdo. And so we've been talking about weirdos all season long. We built a site called Find Your Weirdo to help people to really grasp some of these concepts, to see some examples of companies who've done this really well, like Lego, Impossible Burger, our own clients, Heroku, different folks, and ourselves. And we have been building that resource this quarter. We also have an invitation for people to hire us to help them to find their weirdos, which basically includes like the strategizing around like, what actually does that mean? Because weirdo, you can take that and sort of say, oh, that's like another corporate word for like your right people or whatever. It's sort
your
of
target customer segment or whatever.
Right. Yeah. But it's a lot more specific than that. And so right now we're working with a client, for example, who is selling a product to women who are aging. And so somebody might think like, oh, well, this particular person, maybe we get specific about like their psychographics or whatever. That's what you mean. And it's like, no, that's not what we mean. It means people who weird out about something. Like they're excited about a particular thing that they spend their time on, even when they're not working. Like people,
like they really geek out on this.
Yeah. Like it could be a work thing. Like for me, the idea of people first growth, that is true. Like I think about it all the time. I'm constantly looking for things, but not every person that has a marketing role or whatever is like weirding out about that. We're doing a Find Your Weirdos project for one of our clients right now. And we're developing this project that appeals to developers who are like proud of the web the way that it used to be. And excited about the way the web used to be when, like when I was in the 8th grade and I was first discovering it, right? It was ugly, but there were beautiful things about it because it was all about community and what you could build yourself. And it wasn't all about image, right? And it's really interesting though, thinking about weirdos as like it's the specific group of people who care about something so much that they think about it when they're not at work or whatever.
Yep.
So we designed an offer that was helping people do that, find their weirdos, create something for them, roll it out, the whole deal. But we're also creating a resource for people to really grapple with that question. But all of those things have to be aligned, like, for us, I kind of see them as like pieces, like rails on a train track. It's like all going the same direction, do like little pieces of this, like maybe you're sharing on social media all the time, but you don't have like a really clear narrative, or maybe you do have a really clear narrative, but you have no time-bound constraint. Like we're doing this during this part right now, so you can participate now, or you can't participate in this, right?
Limited time offer.
Right, exactly. Or maybe you're talking about something, but it's not actually directly related to what you're offering, right? And so there's not alignment there. Or maybe you are really good at talking to the people who already know you, but you don't have the outreach piece. You're not reaching people who've never heard of you before. Or maybe people who already know you really resonate with what you're doing, but the people that you are meeting who are brand new are like, I don't get it, because you've focused so much on that intimacy that you haven't taken the approach of like, what if somebody was looking at me from 100 yards away? What would they see that's relevant to them? So it's like aligning all of these pieces so they're going in the same direction.
Yeah, no, I think what you're saying is in everything, there's this underlying tension between what we want and what we need, right?
Yeah.
And I think the really beautiful kind of like judo mindset hack move that you're doing is you're saying, hey, that's not a problem. That's actually your doorway to a solution, right?
Yes.
It's in that tension that you're going to find the thing that will take you where you want to go and is going to meet your needs along the way. So from there, you said, okay, what we want is for Anya to be this amazing educational resource, this beacon of people first growth in the world. Yep. What we need is to close this revenue gap in like 6 weeks. So, all right, what are we going to do about that? Yep. Started brainstorming all this, and you all got together, and what you came out with was saying, okay, like, let's do a seasonal thing. Let's like go out into the world with the season of the weirdo, and let's create an entire narrative and set of offers around helping people. You know, since your overriding mission is to help people develop their relationship with their customers through creative technology, you're saying, cool, a specific way we can do that is to help companies find their weirdos. Yep. And we can build a whole set of offers around that. Am I getting this right?
Yep. Yep, exactly.
Okay. Thank you for the example. Cause like I find that when you can ground it in and attach it to something real, suddenly it snaps into focus. I can see it now.
Yeah. It is a very practical approach to something that can seem really ephemeral. And that's the thing that I'm really trying to bring to this conversation. I feel like a lot of people bring the side of like business and here's like successful things that you can do. And then there's people who are like, here's what the world should be like. Like, how do we make the world what it should be like right now? What can we do to
how do we connect these two?
Yeah. And I think that's hard to do, you know?
A previous time you and I were talking, I asked you if you had read the book, The Infinite Game by Simon Sinek. Yeah. And I actually think there's a really strong link between what you're describing right now and the work he talks about there, because his whole thing is basically, how does one be an idealist in a world that demands pragmatism? Right. And that just wants to beat the idealism out of all of us. That's a really hard question, but I think you actually have found, I'm not going to say like the only answer, but a good answer to that question is like, that's what I'm actually really getting excited about as we're having this conversation about this idea of people first growth and that sort of different way of looking at the tension between needs and wants, bridging the gap between pragmatism and idealism.
Yeah, no, I love like David White, the poet, talks about this in The Heart Aroused, on poetry and the preservation of the soul in corporate America, I think is what it's called. But nice. It's so good. But he talks about how the corporate world needs poets because they need this. He calls it like the Dionysian part. The Dionysian part of us is like wrestling with in the dirt. You know, corporate America is more the Apollonic, I guess. I don't know. It's the ideal. It's like everything's clean. Everything is like
everything's perfect. Everything's clean.
Right. But the soul, which is something that the poet is really good at, is like it kind of loves the messy as much as it fears it. It loves like when things get shaken up. It loves because that's where the growth of the soul happens, you know?
Yeah. Do you ever read anything by Richard Rohr?
Oh man. Well, my friend Carissa actually loves Richard Rohr and I haven't gotten into it yet. It's one of those things that I'm like, okay, I need to find a doorway into that. But
I think I got a door for you here. I think a doorway you might find into Richard Rohr's work is the book Falling Upward. Okay. And the reason I think specifically where I think you'll find a doorway, I think he calls this concept the stumbling stone. And it's this idea of exactly what you just touched on, that to develop as a soul, as a person, you know, as all the things that we are beyond the roles we play in the workplace, it gets messy and that's okay. And he talks about this idea of a stumbling stone as the thing that in the moment, it looks like our downfall. It looks like something that's making things worse, right? It's taking us out of this like lofty ideal and it's putting us down in the muck. Yep. But he's saying it's actually a necessary step. That's actually like an aid on your pathway of spiritual growth as a human. It's only by going down into that muck, into the darkness or whatever, that you make your way back out. And that kind of goes back to the Enneagram thing we started the conversation with. It's like in all of like, whatever your framework, your methodology, your path, or your whatever, the thing they're all saying is, look, you have to be willing to go into the darkness to make it out the other side. And you will make it out, but you have to be willing to go or you'll never get there.
Yeah, no, and it's totally like the Jungian thing too, and Joseph Campbell's stuff with the mythology and like the hero's journey kind of thing is like you really do
Totally.
have to you get to know your shadow, and that the shadow is just the flip side of your strengths. And until you actually go there, you don't actually get to use your strengths either. You know what I mean? Like you're not going to fully show up in those. So yeah,
because you won't be able to own it. Like you won't know who you are and where to stand, like going back to loneliness and all that. So dear listener, if you tracked with us through all that, we just connected closing a short-term revenue gap to Jungian psychology and the depths of your soul. You're welcome. I hope you're here for this. If you're not, you might as well get off the train right now.
Aligning all the tracks.
Exactly. That's one of the really fun things about these conversations. It's just like the weird. It's the weird stuff that just kind of all smashes together. And you're like, oh, there's those 7 concepts all sitting next to each other having dinner. Yeah. That's fun.
Yeah, totally.
I'm really curious what lessons that the listener who's interested in pursuing this pathway of people first growth can learn from the fact that you're at least 18 months ahead of them on that path, right? So I'm just curious if there's any sort of lessons learned where you look back over how you've tried to do things or how you've tried to pursue this idea or bring it into existence within And Yet, where you're like, oh man, I wish I'd known this or I would have done that differently. Is there anything like that where you could say, oh, hey, if you're interested in this idea, just keep this in mind as you pursue it?
Well, I think that it's really difficult when you have been solving these problems for a really long time. And I don't know if this is relevant really, but I write books, right? And I help clients. I work with people individually. I talk about all of these things. And I invent things for myself in my personal life that kind of solve these problems and yet. But the hardest thing to do is to live it, like to live what I know, and even though, like when the fear comes, I was just finished reading Dune for the first time. And
it's so good. I'm so happy for you. It's so good.
It's amazing. But the thing that really, really hit me in that was how, fear is the enemy. And they have this whole process for dealing with that fear. And it's really embodying like this calm so that you actually have control over your own faculties. And knowing that fear actually makes you make the worst decisions. And fear is the thing that keeps you backpedaling, backtracking, going back to old things that didn't work because you're just like, oh my gosh, like we have to do this. And in order to get rid of the fear, we kind of revert back to old patterns and old habits. And also to not trusting what we know. So I think that for me, the thing that I would always want to know is just that awareness of what fear does to not only me and my decision making, but to everybody around me, just so that when it happens, like I have a plan for that so that we're not backpedaling and saying, oh, wait.
How do you deal with the fear?
Oh my gosh. Fear is so hard. Like for me, because going back to the Enneagram 6, it's like, I always have like this underlying sense of hypervigilance, what are all the things that I need to plan for so that and it's weird too, because I'm also like very spontaneous. And like, if you're also familiar with Myers-Briggs, the INFP is the one that's like, kind of throwing plans out the window. I'm like both the planner and the one who throws the plans out the window. I am really trying to pay attention to what it feels like in this moment. I mean, they're all just basic things that you learn about in meditation practice or in yoga or whatever.
Sure.
But it is really like experiencing what the emotion feels like inside of my body rather than thinking, So the first thing is like thinking, instead of thinking, oh my gosh, I'm so scared, thinking like, oh, I've got this buzzy feeling right here. and it's kind of like moving around and paying attention to that. And also really like giving myself the things that my soul actually needs that feed my soul, because when my soul feels full, I feel confident. I feel excited about the future. David White has this beautiful series on the Waking Up podcast, which is a meditation podcast that I've used for nothing else except for that a friend recommended this series. And it's not even a meditation. It's David White speaking poetry to you, speaking about what that poem means for your life, speaking more poetry to you, you know, and it's like each one is like maybe 10 minutes. But
I love that. Is that on the app or the podcast?
It's the app. In the app.
Oh, yeah. Awesome. I will check that out, because I have that app and I have not checked this out yet. So I'm going to fix that. Yeah.
Well, I haven't looked at anything else but this. And I paid the $100 for the year just to have access to this series. So I think there's a free trial though, or something that you can probably take advantage of.
Yeah, that I will say, just as I will echo that recommendation. The Waking Up app I've tried all of them. It's like my favorite by far of all the meditation apps. Totally worth the money. That said, like, they're also amazing about if anybody has some sort of financial need and they, that pricing doesn't work for them, email them, they'll give it to you. So just, awesome. It's a fantastic resource. I highly recommend checking out.
Yeah. 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 I mean, finding what feeds you. And for me, I've just noticed that poetry is one of those things. And David White is sort of like my entry point, because he does tie poetry into something that I'm already thinking about and doing, which is, my work in the world. And I find that so valuable. He also has a lecture series. Right now he's got one in November called The Invitational Identity. It just started on Sunday, so I don't know if you can continue to get access to it, but I'm pretty sure he's going to continue doing them since this whole COVID thing has happened, which I get excited because I'm like, people are having to invent ways to connect with people that they ordinarily, like you would have had to go to Ireland or something on a trip with David White. And now you can like experience that in your living room. It's so nice.
You were talking a minute ago about how to navigate the fear and the growth that this pathway that you're on, both for yourself, but also for your team and for the environment around you that you're creating. And it reminded me of something that I think we talked about before, or maybe it was in your book, but this idea of leading like a gardener. And that seemed like a really cool idea that I'd love you to just talk to me a little bit about that. What does that mean? And how does that actually influence what you're doing as you're navigating this forward? Like how are you showing up differently as a CEO, coming from this place of, quote unquote, leading like a gardener than you would be by default otherwise? Yeah.
Well, I think the metaphors that we use say a lot about what we think and the way that we approach things, even if we're not conscious of them. But so many of the metaphors in business are war metaphors or competition, like even if it's just sports or whatever, or labs, or if it is nature, it's based on like fungus or viruses. And and in thinking about that, I just have been trying to be more intentional about the metaphors that I use. And because it helps you invent a different way to look at something. Language is what we live within. And so if we change our language, we can change the possibilities that we see. And so the thing that I realized is that growth is less like a lab and more like a garden. There are elements that you can control, which is really your response to things, what you decide to nurture, what you decide to prune, what weeds you pull, where you're focusing on. But there are also so many things that we can't control at all. And we can't control the weather, we can't control what occurs, natural disasters. There are a lot of things that we have impact over, but we only have impact over time. Like we can introduce new things into the environment or notice that something's like kind of taking over that we don't want, but it takes time to like figure that out and work with the environment to create the environment that you want. When you think about leadership, especially in the United States culture, you think about like kind of puff ourselves up and we're like, fake it till you make it kind of thing.
Yep.
And definitely we're taught that the way to succeed is to talk about your success. Like even, women who are taught how to be more empowered, it's like, don't apologize. Like just take ownership of your successes and really own those. And I think that's great. But a lot of things like the concept of luck, which is a big concept in both gardening and in life, is just not brought into the picture. That so many of us, it's luck or it's whatever privileges that we have that we're, aware or not aware of, play into that. And then at the same time, like we take so much ownership or blame on ourselves. Like we have so much guilt over our failures or the things that happened that were bad, that we think, man, if I'd only done this or that or the other thing. But a lot of times life is a lot less predictable or controllable than we think. And it's great to feel like you can achieve the American dream if you just work hard enough, but also just acknowledging that like, that's a story, and we have to kind of humble ourselves a little bit and see things as they actually are, which means, a lot less control than we actually think. So.
Yeah. I mean, if 2020's taught us anything, it's that control's an illusion. So.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
It totally is.
Awesome. Well, I want to go ahead and close out here with a couple of rapid fire questions. These short questions, your answers can be as long as you feel.
Okay.
So first one, what would you say is the thing that you know best?
Myself.
That's a good answer. I don't think a lot of people could say that.
Good or bad. Yeah. I think that's the one thing, talking about a garden, that we have more control of than other things that we might not. So,
what is a quote or a saying, a phrase that's important to you, that you return to often? And what about it speaks to you?
I'm going to say this wrong, but in the movie Babette's Feast, at the end, there's this line, there is like throughout the world, there is one long cry from the heart of the artist, give me leave to do my utmost. And I absolutely love that. It gives me chills, especially in the context of that movie, because the art that they're talking about here is preparing this really special meal for people from a very humble position. And just the experience of that and kind of what's revealed within that, it's a very humble thing to do that, but to do it with such love and such care and such presence. I want to live that way. That's what I want for my life. So, yeah.
That's beautiful. Thank you. I feel like that's the perfect place to end this very thoughtful conversation. So, I mean, I would drop the mic for you, but I think you need it. So first of all, Sarah, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for sharing these ideas and just for hanging out with me today. So much fun and really my privilege. So just in closing out, what would you like to leave the listener with?
I think just that the struggles that you have, you're not alone. And no matter what position that you're in, when it feels like everybody around you is like doing so great, it's all kind of a story as well. I just want people to be encouraged that you can change what is possible for you, not just in the long term, but also in the coming days and weeks ahead. And it's hard though, and you're not alone in it.
Thank you. And for anyone who wants to follow up with you or follow your work, where would you have people follow you online, or where would you direct them?
Well, andiat.com is, the team that I work with, and the stuff that we're doing there is always pretty interesting. And then for me personally, it's tied to Andiat, but I have I do a lot of just creating out loud kind of stuff. Like my book, I'm writing out loud, and I've got this public Rome project that I update. And you can find those at sarahavenir.com. I just kind of keep that updated with, here's the list of things I'm doing right now.
Perfect. And there's a lot of stuff. I've checked that out. There's a lot of great places there to engage. So we'll definitely put all that in the show notes. So anyways, Sarah, thank you so much for being here. It's been really, really fun hanging out with you, and keep up the great work.
Yeah, thank you. This was super fun. I appreciate it.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review us on iTunes. That helps us reach way more people and build this community up. For show notes, links to the resources, and everything else we discussed, please go to enliven.fm. Feel free to reach out with questions, feedback, or just to say hello by emailing connect@enliven.fm. Be sure to subscribe, and until next time, my friends, leave them better than you found them. We'll see you soon.